I know last month started out with the definition of lean. What is lean? So the central idea of lean is that you're providing more value to your customer while minimizing waste and creating processes that use fewer resources to provide those products and services. So last time we talked about value and customer, and this week, or month, we wanted to talk about waste. But before we get there, there were some additional thoughts on value that will lead us into waste that I wanted to talk about. So, kind of the standard definition of value are the top two bullets. Frequently, people talk about value. Is it something that the customer is willing to pay for? And or does it change the fit, form, or function of the product or service? So a way to think about it is if you did a line item bill and you said, oh, I had to move the windows from the front of the house to the back of the house, that costed $50. So the customer are going to look at the bill and go, well, what's that? Even though those are necessary things that you have to do, right? In construction of moving materials from point A to point B isn't necessarily changing anything in terms of the customer yet. Obviously, getting the materials to do a job is important, but you haven't actually changed something yet. So another question to ask yourself with value is the task done right the first time? Because obviously the customer doesn't want to pay for it twice, right? And then some other things to think about. Is it just in time? Is it just what the customer needs in the correct amount, where they need it, when they need it, and using the minimum amount of resources to do it? So when you're thinking about value, then those are some questions that you can ask yourself in your processes. So the opposite of value then in the lean world is waste. And so you could think of waste as anything that adds cost without adding value. There's things that are value added and they're necessary. There's things that are value added and they're not necessary, but I kind of grade that out because not necessary, they're like opposites of each other, but I'll explain this a little bit more in a minute. And then there's non-value added necessary and non-value added not necessary. So if you were looking at a process and you divided process steps into these different quadrants, what would be the first quadrant that you would go after? So you would go after here. Right. So next you'd say, okay, necessary. Well, I got to pay taxes, and so I got to do accounting and all that kind of stuff. Well, the customer doesn't really care how you do that. Just want to make sure that you're legal, right? So you would want to find ways to be as efficient as possible with these things, and then value add not necessary. So in today's world, it could be the customer does find value in it, and you think of it as necessary. So something that is value added today but could become waste into the future. So there's generally considered to be 7 different kinds of wastes. And there's various acronyms that people have to help remember what they are. I'm going to use this one called TIMWOOD. So there's transportation, inventory, motion, waiting, over processing, overproduction, and defects. And so some of this is fairly self-explanatory. Transportation, moving items from one location to another. So if we went back to our definitions of waste, is that something that the customer is willing to pay for? Or did it change the form, fit, or function of something? Of just moving it from one place to another is typically a big source of waste. Now, obviously, if you're a transportation company and that's what the customer is paying for, this obviously wouldn't be a waste. It would be what, is value. So inventory. Why is inventory on the waste list? So, it could be the widget, it could be paperwork, and it could be information. So if something is sitting in inventory, nothing is happening to it. So you go back to the definition of, are you changing the fit, form, or function of it? Well, it's just sitting there in inventory. No, you're not. So ideally, you would make it and deliver it. So you go to McDonald's, do you want the hamburger that sat there for 5 minutes or the one that just came off the grill? Motion. What would be an example of motion?
But it's eliminating the extra movements that you have to do in order to perform your job.
Yep. So in motion, we're generally talking about people versus transportation. We're talking about things. It's more related to the ergonomics and people. If you're sitting, standing, bending, moving, reaching, all those kinds of things. So Lean would say all of those are waste, that you would want to bring everything close as possible to the operation so that you minimize the amount of movement that you have to do. I mean, kind of common sense things of more frequently used stuff that should be upfront, easy to access. Yeah. Waiting. I think we can all relate to this one. Go visit the doctor, and from the customer perspective, is sitting in the waiting room value added? Nope. Overprocessing. I'm most familiar with overprocessing in the manufacturing world. So you think about surface finishes and things like that, of how smooth does something really need to be. So you could overprocess it.
So if the client's going to be happy with a texture like this on their table, and you're going to go the extra step and make it smooth as glass, you're wasting your time because they don't care. They just want this texture and they're fine with that.
Right. Overproduction. So it's generally regarded as the grandfather of all the other forms of waste. And kind of tied to inventory of, if you are producing more than the customer demand, then you have to transport it, you have to store it, there's all kinds of delays and things. And then I think defects is pretty self-explanatory of kind of the quality side of things. So symptoms of waste. So kind of given the different categories of waste, but what do you think would be some symptoms of waste? What would I be looking for if I came to your business? So really these top ones are things that I would look at. Would be interested in knowing about cost, quality, and time. And then what are your customers experiencing? How competitive are you in the cost world, and what are your customers experiencing in terms of the delivery of your product? So some other things like inflexible systems. So, walking through a process and it's like, well, that's, we got to do it this way because of the system kind of thing. Inventory is also a symptom of waste, or excessive inventory. So workarounds, constantly doing workarounds. Hey, there's probably some waste. There's a lot of variability. Down here is really thinking about leadership or management type of issues with processes and waste. So kind of what are the causes of waste? I got a whole big long list. Yeah. Obviously, none of these are exhaustive, and I've kind of collected stuff from a couple of different places. But instead of reading the whole list here, I'll let you guys look at it for a minute. So these top ones are more typical in factory manufacturing type of world. So in an earlier slide, I used technology changing, and we were just kind of talking about it in outdated processes. Functional organizations. Why do I have that on there? From a lean perspective, we want to think about things in terms of value streams. So it's if you think about, if you think of the functional departments kind of this way, a value stream is going to go across the functional departments. If you have a customer that wants this apartment complex built, they're going to have to go through sales, through engineering, through manufacturing, through construction of it, and it's all of the handoffs between them.
Sure.
And so then you have potential conflicting priorities and things, goals in the functional organization.
Yeah.
Engineering could
Well,
say, "Oh, we want to minimize the amount of, or architecture, or whatever. We want to minimize the amount of time we spend on this design," which means when it comes over into manufacturing, it could be hard to build, and then causes
Yeah,
problems
sure.
on the job side of actual
Yeah, that's
constructing
something
it.
they're dealing with daily.
Right. So, after this discussion about waste, what about your processes?